Once upon a time in Lagos, there lived a woman named Jane, a beautiful, elegant, and wealthy entrepreneur who owned multiple businesses. A thriving real estate company, a transportation firm with dozens of buses, and countless investments scattered across the country. But despite her immense fortune, Jane kept one thing hidden from her husband, Tony: her wealth. To Tony, Jane was simply his wife, a gentle, modest woman who depended on his income. He never knew that the woman he loved controlled more wealth than he could ever imagine. Together, they had a son named Paul, a bright, kind boy who suddenly fell gravely ill. Doctors diagnosed him with kidney failure, and his condition required urgent treatment abroad. Tony did everything possible to save his son. He paid for dialysis, borrowed from banks, and begged friends for help, but no one could lend him enough. When all hope seemed lost, he decided to sell their house to raise money for Paul's treatment overseas. That evening, he told Jane about his plan. "Honey, Paul's condition is getting worse. I think we should sell this house and use the money to take him abroad. Afterwards, we can rent a smaller apartment." Jane smiled faintly. "That's a good idea. When do you plan to sell?" "As soon as I find a buyer," Tony said. Jane nodded, but inside, she was already scheming. The next day, she met with her lawyer, Barrister Eek, and gave him a shocking instruction. "I want to buy our house," she said coldly. "Use the name of my real estate company. My husband doesn't know I own it. Make it happen this week." The lawyer was hesitant. "Ma, if he finds out, he'll be furious." "Are you sure about this?" "I'm not asking for advice," Jane snapped. "Do as I say." A few days later, the deal was completed. Jane secretly bought her own family's house for 75 million Nigerian nairas, using her company's name. Tony, unaware that his wife was the buyer, moved out with his family after receiving a 2-week eviction notice. Jane even suggested a new place to rent, a house she had bought 2 months earlier, which she now rented back to Tony for 10 million Nigerian nairas per year. Tony unknowingly paid rent to his own wife. Jane was now, secretly, their landlady. The plan to fly Paul to India had been set in motion. Doctors in Lagos had referred them to specialists there. Tony had applied for visas for himself and Paul. They were told to wait 2 weeks and attend one more interview. Jane, however, had other plans. The truth was she wanted Paul to die. She had decided to sabotage the trip and ruin Tony further. One morning, she contacted a feared gang leader known as Debo. "I have a job for you," she said. "Kidnap my son tomorrow morning. I'll pay you 3 million naira. Do it perfectly. No mistakes." The next day, as Tony drove Paul to a visa interview, masked men ambushed them and abducted the boy. Soon after, Tony received a call demanding 60 million Nigerian nairas ransom. He was crushed. "How will I raise that money? I sold the house to pay for his treatment." Jane pretended to cry beside him. "Please, pay them whatever they want," she said, secretly delighted. The next morning, Tony withdrew 60 million Nigerian nairas and delivered it to the kidnappers. Hours later, Paul was released, frightened but alive. Tony wept with relief, not knowing his wife had staged the entire ordeal. Tony drove Paul straight to the hospital. Paul was readmitted for checks. Thankfully, he had not worsened. Tony spent the night at the hospital with him. Jane visited briefly at daybreak and left soon after. Determined to raise more money for treatment, Tony sold part of his company's shares, worth 50 billion Nigerian nairas. When Jane heard, she immediately texted her real estate manager. "Buy all of Tony's shares. I want to own everything." Her plan was simple: buy her husband's company through her shell firms and crush him financially. When Tony finally got the funds and arranged travel to India, Jane struck again. The night before departure, she secretly stole their passports, visas, and tickets, and the next morning, she burned them to ashes. At the airport, Tony panicked. "Jane, our documents are missing. Have you seen them?" "I didn't see them," Jane said, feigning shock and concern. In reality, the passports and visas were stolen and burnt by her. When Tony and Paul returned home, they searched the house vainly. Jane comforted him. "We'll apply for new visas. Don't worry." That night, while Tony stayed up late applying for replacements, Jane whispered to herself, "When I'm done with you, you'll regret ever crossing me." She wasn't finished. She called Debo again. "Come to my house tonight. Don't hurt anyone. Just steal Tony's phone and ATM card. I'll leave the door open. There's a large sum in his account. Once you have his phone and card, I'll give you the banking details. Come around midnight. Debo agreed. Jane went to bed confident her plan would work. Tony and Paul slept unaware of the danger. Around 2:47 a.m., the lights went out. Debo and his men stormed the house. Jane guided them to Tony's room, showing them where his briefcase was hidden. But Tony, awakened by the noise, reached for a gun he had bought after the kidnapping, went to fetch it from the storeroom. The robbers had not expected resistance. Debo reached for his own weapon, but Tony shot his hand. The gun fell, discharged, and a bullet struck one gang member dead. Panic erupted. Tony moved decisively, disarming the remaining robbers, capturing their weapons, and collecting what they had stolen. He shot the legs of Debo and the other robber to ensure they could not rise, then tied them up with rope. "I'll take you to the police station," Tony told them. The police arrived shortly after and arrested the three robbers, praising Tony for his courage. Jane's heart raced. She worried Debo would tell the police the truth and expose her orchestration of the crimes. Jane panicked. "If Debo talks, I'm finished." The next day, she disguised herself, wearing a face cap and dark glasses, and went to the police station with fried rice and chicken, pretending to be Debo's girlfriend. "I want to see Debo, the man arrested for armed robbery," Jane said immediately as she entered the police station. The police officer at the counter tried to look at her face, but she kept turning away, pretending to inspect the decorations and picture frames on the wall. "Who are you, and why do you want to see him? Are you sure you're not one of the armed robbers?" the officer asked suspiciously. "What kind of question is that? I said I'd like to see Debo, and you're asking if I'm one of the robbers? Even if Debo was arrested for armed robbery, he still has rights and is entitled to a lawyer for his case," she said furiously. "Are you his lawyer?" the officer asked again. "I just asked you to identify yourself and your connection to Debo, and you're shouting. Stop shouting and tell me who you are." "My name is Jenny, and I'm Debo's girlfriend. I brought food for him," she said sweetly, handing over the meal. "How did you know we arrested your boyfriend? I still insist you're one of the robbers. You were just lucky to escape before Mr. Tony could arrest you like he did the others," the policeman said. He stood up to look closely at Jane's face, but she was quick and clever. She dipped her hand into her handbag and brought out 50,000 Nigerian nairas, gently folding it into the officer's hand. The man immediately relaxed and smiled. "Okay, wait here. Let me go and bring Debo from detention. I'll be back soon," he said. Within a few minutes, the policeman went to the cell and re-emerged with Debo and the other armed robbers. "Thank you very much," Jane said. "Here is the food," pointing to the food on the countertop. But the officer insisted, "Janum, you must taste the food first before the suspect eats it. We want to be sure the food is not poisonous," he said. Jane froze. The food contained rat poison. Refusing would look suspicious, and policeman was Janement. "Janum, it's standard practice here. Once you bring food for someone in detention, you must taste it first. There are no two ways about it. The suspects cannot eat unless you taste it. We don't want anything to happen to them until they're charged to court, where they'll have their day with the law. So please taste the food," he insisted. Jane hesitated for a moment, then decided to take the risk. She took one spoonful of the poisoned fried rice, chewed, and swallowed it. Her heart pounded. She knew she could die, but there was no way she could leave the station without tasting the food. Refusing outrightly would have made her look suspicious and led to her arrest. Immediately after Jane tasted the food, Debo and the other armed robbers began to eat. Jane started looking for a way to leave the station before the poison began to take effect. She couldn't stay there for it to work. If they collapsed or died in her presence, she would be arrested instantly. "Let me buy water for—" "I forgot to bring them water," Jane said. The policeman permitted her to go. She walked outside, but instead of buying water, she crossed to the other side of the road, entered a taxi, and disappeared from the station. Minutes later, Debo and another robber collapsed after eating the poisoned meal. The police rushed them to a hospital, the same hospital Jane visited to treat herself with an antidote. There, she bribed a corrupt doctor to declare the robbers dead. The armed robbers were rushed straight to the emergency unit. The doctor on duty was called to attend to them, but when he arrived, he shook his head sadly. "It's too late," the doctor said. "They're dead." The poison has damaged vital organs. There's nothing else we can do. Please take them to the mortuary. However, the policemen were not satisfied. They suspected foul play. Are you sure they're dead? One of them asked. Are you sure you checked properly? They were talking just now. Please, check again. A nurse nearby replied, Officer, if the doctor says they're dead, he must have checked very well before making that statement. There's no way he would declare them dead if they're not actually gone. Please step aside so we can take them to the mortuary. But the policemen refused. One of them strongly believed the armed robbers were still alive and rejected the idea of taking them to the mortuary. Don't touch them, he ordered. We'll take them to another hospital. He called two of his colleagues, and together they lifted Debo and his gang member and carried them back into the police van. Meanwhile, Jane believed her problem was solved. She relaxed, unaware that a suspicious officer had transferred the men to another hospital, where the doctor there quickly attended to Debo and his partner. After a few minutes of treatment, both men began to revive. I said it! The policeman who had been suspicious shouted. I knew they were still alive. They're lucky you brought them here quickly, the doctor said as he continued treatment. They can still make it. When Debo regained consciousness, rage filled his heart. She tried to kill me, he told the police. I'll expose her. Everything, the kidnapping, the robbery, all of it. That evening, Debo confessed everything to the divisional police officer, DPO. He revealed how Jane orchestrated her son's kidnapping, hired them for the robbery, and even tried to poison them. The DPO gathered evidence, including her text messages, and set out to arrest her. But when they arrived at her house, Jane wasn't there. She had gone to the supermarket. Tony, resting at home, was stunned when the police told him his wife was behind everything. That's impossible, he stammered. Jane would never do such a thing. But when the DPO showed him Debo's phone, filled with Jane's messages and voice notes, Tony's world shattered. The police left to continue their search. When Jane returned and saw their vehicles leaving the compound, she hid and fled to one of her secret mansions, switching off her phone. From there, she called her lawyer the next morning. Serve my husband a quit notice, she ordered coldly. Give him 24 hours to leave the house. The lawyer hesitated. But Janum, that's your husband. I said throw him out, Jane barked. The next day, Tony received the notice. Furious and heartbroken, he drove off to clear his head, and got into a terrible accident. As he lay in the hospital fighting for his life, Jane sipped wine in her hidden mansion, smiling in satisfaction. Meanwhile, Paul remained in the hospital, still weak from his supposed kidney disease. But one morning, curiosity got the better of him. If I really have a kidney disease, I should have died by now. Why am I still alive despite never having the transplant the doctor recommended? I've spent almost 2 years here, and he keeps saying I'll die if I go home. All the doctor gives me is just one injection that makes me weak. I think I have to do my own investigation, Paul said to himself. He searched the trash can in his room and found an empty medicine bottle. When he Googled the name, his blood ran cold. It wasn't kidney medicine. It was a sedative. This doctor has been lying to me, he whispered. As he crept out of his room to escape, he overheard voices from the doctor's office. It was his mother. I want you to keep giving him the sleeping injection, Jane was saying. Keep telling my husband he needs treatment abroad. I'll pay you as agreed. The doctor hesitated. But Janum, what if he dies? Your husband will suspect me. If he dies, that's even better. I want him dead, Jane replied coldly. Paul froze. His heart pounded as he continued recording with his phone. Then came the most shocking revelation of all. Paul is not even my biological son, Jane said bitterly. He's the child of my housemaid. Years ago, my husband got her pregnant. When I found out, I lost my baby and my womb in the fight that followed. I vowed to make them both suffer. That boy is living proof of my pain. I will never let him live happily. Tears rolled down Paul's face. He quietly backed away, but the door creaked. Jane turned and saw him recording. Paul! She screamed, charging toward him. He ran down the hallway, leapt into the elevator, and escaped the hospital before she could catch him. He fled home and showed the recording to his father, who was recovering from his accident. Together, they contacted the police. 2 days later, Jane received a call from the doctor. Jane, the doctor said urgently. Paul collapsed again. He was rushed in unconscious. We have him sedated. Please come immediately. Jane's lips curved into a wicked smile. Finally, she whispered to herself. This ends today. She grabbed her car keys and sped off, her heart pounding. Not with fear, but anticipation. She could already imagine a world without Paul, without Tony, without reminders of her pain. When she stormed into the hospital ward, the room was strangely quiet. She took a few steps in, scanning for Paul's bed. Then her smile froze. On the hospital bed wasn't Paul. It was Debo, heavily bandaged but very much alive, and smiling. Hello, Jane, landlady, he sneered. Missed me? Before Jane could react, the door swung open. Tony stepped in, followed by uniformed officers and the DPO himself. Jane, the DPO said firmly, you are under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, attempted murder, and multiple counts of fraud. Jane's body trembled. What is this? You can't. But her words failed as Tony held up his phone, playing a familiar audio, the recording Paul had made of her conversation with the doctor. Her own voice echoed through the room. I want him dead. That boy is not my son. He's the son of my maid. And the reason I lost my womb. Jane's legs gave way. She collapsed to her knees, her tears finally real. Not of guilt, but of the realization that her carefully built empire of deceit had crumbled. The DPO continued, your lawyer and doctor have confessed. We have your company records, the money trail, everything. You've been under investigation since the day Debo survived the poisoning. Tony stared at her, eyes filled with a mix of pity and disbelief. You bought our house. You kidnapped our son. You almost killed us, all because of revenge. You became the monster you hated. Jane reached for him weakly. You destroyed me first, she whispered, her voice trembling. You made me barren. You made me this. Tony turned away. No, Jane. You made yourself this. As the officers handcuffed her, Jane screamed and tried to resist, but her strength failed. The world she built on lies and vengeance had finally turned to dust. Later, the investigation revealed everything. Jane's hidden companies, offshore accounts, forged documents, and years of manipulation. Her lawyer testified against her, and even the corrupt doctor admitted to poisoning Paul under her orders. Tony regained ownership of his company, his home, and most importantly, his peace. Paul was taken to another hospital, where doctors confirmed he had no kidney disease at all. Just traces of the sedative that had kept him weak for years. With proper care, he recovered fully. On the day of Jane's sentencing, she stood silently in court, dressed in prison clothes, her once proud face pale and hollow. When the judge pronounced life imprisonment, she didn't cry. She just stared ahead blankly, the image of Paul and Tony walking out of the courtroom together burning in her mind. And as the doors closed behind her, Jane finally whispered the words no one heard. Maybe I only wanted love, and forgot how to give it.